Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Dan Pickett and I'm co-founder of Launch Academy. And I'm really excited today to be bringing you our Intro to Front-End Web Development course. Together we're going to explore the wonderful worlds of HTML and CSS, and we're going to dive in every Tuesday and Thursday at noon here live to basically unlock a different piece of front-end web development every single episode. I just first want to start by honoring you. You showed up. You're here. You're taking that first step, that all-important first step in becoming a real-world professional web developer. And I just want to honor you and just thank you for being here with us. I know it's been a long road and you're finally here, and I just can't give you enough credit for showing up. I hope that you'll keep showing up. We're gonna have about 20 or so episodes together, and I hope that you'll bring everything that you have and have some fun along the way with me. So we're gonna be here every Tuesday and Thursday at noon to share some knowledge around HTML, CSS, and just generally about the web development industry. So there'll be a lot of meta mixed in as we work through all the course material. But before we jump into the specifics and the technical nitty-gritty, I first just want to talk a little bit about the logistics of the course. So as I mentioned, I'll be here live every Tuesday and Thursday at noon, and these episodes will be available to you live on our Facebook page. And as we record about 3 to 5 episodes at a time, we'll be sure to also post these on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to check those all out asynchronously there as well. I'm going to try to keep the educational portion of our episodes to about 40 minutes. Here at Launch Academy, we try to keep all of our facilitations, all of our sort of guided instruction to that time period, because what ends up happening is we start losing folks right around 45 minutes or 50 minutes. So I'm going to try to keep it to that sweet spot of about 40 minutes at a time. The real important thing I want to convey, and the real habit that you want to establish starting with this exact first episode, is don't just be a spectator. Don't just watch me go through this material. It's so important that you actually follow along, do the exercises, do the work. I like to use the metaphor of training to be a black belt in Kung Fu. Right? You couldn't become a black belt just by watching a bunch of old Bruce Lee movies, right? You have to actually do the work and do the exercise and get yourself to that place. So think about this course as your quest to get the black belt in front-end web development. And you need to do so by showing up every day and doing the hard work and doing the exercises right alongside me. So don't just be a spectator. At Launch Academy, we love to say that we prescribe to a learn by doing approach, and every episode is going to end with something actionable and something that you can do to basically improve your front-end web development skills. So super important that you get that work done, you follow along, and not just be a spectator. All right. So once we hit stride from episode to episode, we'll take a look at that homework that we assign at the end of each episode and ensure that everyone has clarity on what the expectations were and whether you either hit or didn't hit the mark. Another educational component of what we do here at Launch Academy is called regular self-appraisal. So you want to be checking in with yourself at the end of each episode and asking yourself questions about how much you've retained, how much knowledge you're gaining. Right? The more you kind of quiz yourself and kind of check in with how much you actually know, and the best way to know that is to actually do the work, the better off you're going to be at the end of these 20 or so episodes that we're going to be together for. Cool. All right. So, lastly, just for logistics, you want to make sure that you sign up for our Slack chat. So as we're live here, you're going to be able to answer any questions that you have. Spencer and I are going to be checking the Slack chat channel throughout each episode to make sure that we're responding to questions as you go through material. And it's also a great place to show your work and share your work with others that are going through this journey just like you. With Launch Academy, we're big fans of helping each other out and teaching each other as you're learning, because that's going to actually help you grow as a professional and as an individual as well. So get involved in the Slack chat. If you go to html-show-slack.launchacademy.com, you'll be able to enter your email address and get started and get involved in the conversation there. Cool. All right. So today, if you're watching via live stream, go ahead and comment in the Facebook feed, and we'll pay attention to that. But moving forward, after the first episode or so, we're going to be paying attention exclusively to Slack, so you want to make sure that you're registered and ready to go there. And even if you're watching this and we're no longer live, I encourage you to go into the Slack chat channel. Spencer and I will be hanging out, as well as some of the other Launch Academy instructional staff, and we'll be able to help you no matter where you are in the course. This is a wonderful way to get involved with Launch Academy as an institution, but also your fellow learners. So make sure you check out Slack and get involved in the conversation there. Another way to not just learn by spectating, but to get involved in the conversation and learn with others. All right, awesome. So let's talk in general about learning to program. So like learning anything, learning to program can be really challenging. And it can be very daunting and intimidating, especially as you're starting out. Well, just know that nothing good comes without effort. And there are going to be times that as you're working through this course and as you're learning to program in general, there are going to be times where you're frustrated. And the computer is going to be constantly telling you that you're doing things incorrectly or giving you error messages that you don't necessarily understand. And at times you're going to want to chuck your laptop out the window. But don't do that. It's very hazardous to your laptop's health. But also make sure that you don't go through that alone. Again, going to that Slack chat channel, having a friend going through that learn to code process with you is just super, super important. So knowing that it's going to be hard, having that expectation up front is really going to help you to modify your expectations. So much of the work is going to be responding to error messages and dealing with those error messages, and it's not going to be the most polite message that you're going to get from the computer. So you want to make sure that you understand that the computer is just trying to help you out. It's going to give you a terse error message, and you're not always going to know the answer or the solution based on what that error message is, and that's perfectly okay. That's all part of the process and all part of the learning. Other thing that you should know about learning to code and just the software engineering profession in general is that you're committing to a lifetime of learning, and you're always going to be learning new things. For example, when I started out, I started my software engineering career when I was 15, and I started using technologies that I'm no longer using. Fast forward 20 years, now I'm dating myself, but 20 years, and I'm using a whole different set of technologies. And for a beginner, that can be very intimidating to know that technology is going to change and you're going to have to keep up with that change. But as you get more seasoned as an engineer, you actually start to appreciate that as one of the greatest facets of the profession. There's always going to be something new to learn. There's always going to be knowledge that's just outside your grasp. And that's what keeps it challenging, keeps it interesting, and keeps it really, really invigorating. All right, so moving on, let's talk about what you'll learn and do during this particular course. This class is focused and really all about two primary technologies: HTML, or hypertext markup language, and CSS, cascading style sheets. These two technologies are the foundational components of front-end web development, and you want to make sure that you understand that across every stack, every full stack, whether it's Ruby on Rails, PHP, ASP.NET, it doesn't matter. The fundamental technologies that the web is driven by are these two quintessential technologies, HTML and CSS. And that's what we're going to be focused on over the next few episodes and really the entirety of the course, so that you can put your best foot forward in continuing to learn and grow as a programmer. So as far as what we're going to do, we're going to basically give you all the foundational elements of what it is to build good, sound, semantic, and accessible HTML markup for the first 4 to 5 episodes. And then the next 10 episodes or so are going to really be focused on CSS and this technique called responsive design. So one of the things that has come to the forefront with the emergence of mobile devices and tablets is the need to be able to accommodate different screen resolutions and different functionalities from device to device. And this whole idea is called the discipline of responsive design. So we'll spend the first roughly 12 to 15 episodes just going through the fundamentals of HTML and CSS. And then the last few episodes are going to be putting your resume online and basically taking all of that knowledge that we've learned and making a HTML document that you can be proud of that represents your professional experience. And then we're going to actually take a professionally developed Launch Academy design, and we're going to go and use all of our skills to basically incorporate that and build a fully functional HTML web page based off of the work that a graphic designer has produced for us. And this is very similar to the work that you would do as a full-time front-end engineer, where a graphic designer would give you a static kind of image, or usually it's in Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, and you take that, excuse me, and you make that functional through the use of HTML and CSS. So that should give you a little bit of an idea around the layout of the course and how we're going to be approaching those techniques. Excuse me. All right. So what's wonderful about this course is that it's completely free. There are no prerequisites. So if you're just starting out and learning to program, you're in the right place. We're going to make no assumption that you have any programming foundation or any programming experience. This is the place for you if you're just starting out in the world of web development. And again, I'm so glad that you're here. Okay, awesome. So you should also know that all the software that we're going to use through the duration of the course is completely free and open source. Thanks to some benevolent developers and the wonderful open source community that we all benefit from. All of the software that we're going to use throughout the entire course is 100% completely free. And we'll explore what the open source world means and how it works as we go through the deeper sort of details of the course. So today we're going to start out with defining HTML and what the hypertext markup language is actually for and what it means to be hypertext markup language. So we're going to explore that. And then we're going to actually look at the syntax of an HTML page that's live on the web with a tool called the Chrome Inspector. And we're going to explore what that Chrome Inspector is all about. Then we're going to use a favorite tool of mine called CodePen to create our very first web page together. And we're going to look at things like a doc type and our very first HTML elements, the HTML tag, the head tag, the title tag, the body tag, the H1 tag, and the P tag. And also we're going to download and use the Atom code editor to create our first HTML document locally on our machine. So before we dive in, and while I'm going through this material, particularly if you're watching live, be sure to download the tools that I have here listed underneath the learning objectives. You're going to make sure that you're going to be using Google Chrome across all of the work that we're doing here. We just like Google Chrome as a web developer's tool, and we're going to be showing you things that are specific to the Google Chrome web browser that will make you more productive as a web developer. So you want to be getting used to using that consistently as you do your professional work as a web developer. We're also going to be showing you the Atom web editor, so you can go ahead and download that at http atom.io. And then also, if you're joining us in the Slack chat, which I highly recommend for reasons I outlined earlier in this episode, make sure that you download the actual application. The application is just wonderful to have. Don't just have it open as a tab in your web browser. If you have a dedicated app for it, you're more likely to see the notifications. You're more able to easily get in on the conversation. And what we're trying to do is reduce the friction for you to get involved in the community. So go ahead and download that as well. I actually have the Slack app on my mobile phone as well. So if you're running Android or iOS, and I think it supports Windows Phone as well, you can go ahead and download the mobile client so you can get in on the conversation while you're on the subway or wherever you might be on your mobile device. All right, so with that, let's dive in and talk a little bit about HTML. So I have our very first web page open here in a tool called CodePen.io. And CodePen.io is just a tool that we can use throughout the course as a wonderful way to just quickly jot down some markup, some HTML web page code, so that we can kind of see what it would look like in the context of a web browser. So you can see how this is kind of laid out, where we've got an area where we can put in what's known as hypertext markup language, or HTML. This is what actual HTML looks like. And later we're going to talk about how we can write cascading style sheets to basically make that document look pretty. And then there's also another discipline of front-end web development that involves programming with JavaScript. And that's a bit out of the scope of this course. We may get to covering a bit of it towards the end of the program, but for the purposes of our future episodes, we're really going to be focused on the HTML and CSS components of front-end web development. So what we can see here is I've pre-generated a nice little simple HTML web page, and you can see the code that produces the browser experience here on the bottom of the page. And this essentially is giving us what the markup looks like, the code of the HTML, and then the presentation of the HTML as a web browser would interpret it. And all web browsers are basically download tools. They download hypertext markup language, and then they present it to the end user using some predefined rules about what that markup should look like. So really, every single web page that exists on the World Wide Web, on the internet, consists of this technology, the hypertext markup language. And the hypertext markup language has a bit of a history. We're currently on version 5 of the hypertext markup language. And before, we had many different aspects of HTML that were actually aesthetic in nature. And with the introduction of cascading style sheets, we can now disambiguate between structure through hypertext markup language and aesthetics through cascading style sheets, which is currently at version 3. And HTML, as I mentioned, has gone through multiple revisions, multiple versions. Just like you have different versions of Microsoft Word or Google Chrome or even Mozilla Firefox or whatever it might be, you have access to the different versions and how that has progressed over time. And in earlier versions of HTML, HTML was very confused between structure and aesthetics and what an HTML web page should look and feel like. And with the introduction of cascading style sheets and the latest version of HTML, which is HTML5, we now have this nice separation between structure and look. And for the next few episodes, I think it's really important for us to focus more on the structure of our HTML documents. And we're going to dive into the specifics here in this CodePen.io tool. So you can follow along with me on CodePen if you actually go to my profile page, which is codepen.io/dpickett, and you'll see my collection for this intro course. So be sure to follow along and see all of the markup that's being generated as we work through that particular material. All right, so we've talked a little bit about how HTML provides the structure of our web page. Let's dive into what it actually is and what it looks like. So we call it a markup language because it defines a structure. It defines how a particular document should be outlined. So just like doing an outline in your early elementary coursework when you're writing out a book report or whatever it might be, HTML documents can also have this idea of outline. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to give a clue to the web browser, to the end user, and to search engines, basically the structure and what content is important in the context of our web page. So we use things like the H1 element to essentially say that this content in between its opening tag and its closing tag is important. And the hypertext markup language follows this pattern, where we open a tag using less than and greater than signs, and then we close a tag using similar syntax, but we use a slash instead to basically say that this is a closing tag. And we indent each child element in to basically show a nested relationship, a parent-child relationship between the various markup that we use. So you can see here that from an HTML and markup language standpoint, that the head tag is a child of the HTML tag. And we say that it's a child because it's nested underneath the HTML element, and it's enclosed inside its opening tag and its closing tag. So our head element is located inside our HTML element, and our title element is located inside our head element. So we can see here how this general markup language works. And what we're doing here is we're trying to give the web browser and search engines a little bit of a hint at what this content actually means from a structural standpoint, from the structural meta detail of our document. So we use this title tag to basically inform the tab or the top of our web page to basically give the web browser a nice hint at what they should actually be saying on the top of our page. And then we have what we call block level elements that describe the structure of our page inside the body tag. And the body tag is where we're going to see all of the presentational markup, all of the markup that makes up what we visually see when we pull up a web page on the internet. So we see here that this HTML document has a head tag inside it and a body tag inside it. And inside the body presentational tag, we see a header tag, as we like to call it, and a paragraph tag, as we like to talk about it. So here what we're seeing is below the actual markup, we're seeing the very first sort of presentation of what our HTML web page looks like. So here we see the browser's interpretation of what an H1 tag should look like, and the browser's interpretation of what a P tag should look like. And there are all kinds of presentational block level components that we can use to basically vary the look and feel of our web page. But as I mentioned, for the purposes of the first 4 to 5 episodes here, we really want to be focused on the semantic nature of our markup. And what does it mean for our markup to have semantic meaning? Well, basically what we're seeing here by using the H1 tag for the Hi from HTML title is we're saying that this H1 content is more important than this P content. So much so that we actually have 6 levels of H tags to basically represent the structural outline of our document. So we can see how varying our presentational block level components here varies the visual display of our browser, and we later will be able to adjust things like font size and color and things like that. But for our purposes, we're going to be primarily and exclusively focused on the structural integrity of our document. So let's actually take a look at a web page out there on the World Wide Web and start to look at how we realistically use this semantic markup to describe the structure of our HTML web page. So we're going to go to a popular website called reddit.com. It's where a lot of developers go, and it's just a kind of an online community that talks about things that are happening in the world. And what I've done is I've enlarged the text here so that you can see. But one of the wonderful things about HTML and CSS is that you can actually view the source that makes up an HTML web page. So if we right-click on the Reddit web page once it's fully loaded, I can right-click on it and say View Page Source. And this is going to look like some funky markup, certainly much more complicated than what we've written in our first web page here. But it's basically the same idea. There's this standard that an organization called the W3C has produced for us that we have to use in order to presentationally show the web page that we're trying to produce here. So this visual display is a combination of hypertext markup language and cascading style sheets. The hypertext markup language describes the structure, and the cascading style sheet describes the aesthetics. We're going to focus on cascading style sheets in later episodes. So right now we're going to concern ourselves primarily with the HTML markup. And one thing that you should know when you're viewing the source of an HTML web page is that the formatting isn't going to be super user-friendly. And the reason for that is we want to save white space. We want to save unnecessarily text from being downloaded so that our web pages move in download faster. Excuse me. So instead of using the view source functionality in Chrome, we can use a tool called the Chrome Inspector. And the Chrome Inspector is one of my favorite development tools, and it provides us with a way to essentially look at the markup, view the markup, and even manipulate the hypertext markup language that we're using in the context of a given web page. So let's go ahead and right-click on the HTML web page, and we're going to say, instead of view page source, we're going to actually say inspect. And the Chrome Inspector comes by default with every Chrome browser. So once you've downloaded the Chrome browser, you can use this Chrome Inspector tool. And what I did again here is I just increased the text size so that we can collaborate on it together. But notice as I mouse over certain components in my HTML web page in Chrome Inspector, notice how the page next to it is being highlighted to basically show the various elements and what they represent structurally in the components of our HTML web page. So here we see what we used in our most basic example of using a p tag for a paragraph of text that is actually currently empty. And here we see a span tag that represents the ranking of 1 here. And all of these different elements, as we like to call them, and the elements are indicated by the less than sign, and then the element name immediately precedes that less than sign. We can see here the markup that makes up an HTML web page. So here we see the paragraph tag that indicates when the first article was submitted. Now what's really cool with the Chrome Inspector is we can actually modify or edit the HTML web page once it's downloaded. So here I could say was uploaded by, and we'll see that that text was actually changed from submitted by to uploaded by. Now it's really important to understand that when we modify HTML markup in our Chrome Inspector, that it actually does not persist from load to load. So if I go ahead and I refresh my page here on Reddit, the changes that I made in Chrome Inspector are going to be lost. So make sure that as you're playing around with things that you know that everything that you do in the Chrome Inspector is temporary. And you're going to want to make sure that if you're modifying that document in either CodePen or in your code editor, that you go ahead and you make those changes also there, because they'll be lost when you refresh the page. Cool. Okay, so you can see here how I can just dive into some of the specifics of the markup here and start to understand the structural nature of my HTML web page. And the Chrome Inspector is going to give us a little bit better visibility into what each element is structurally represented by the presentation that's seen in the actual web browser. So later, I'm going to ask you to go to one of your favorite web pages and actually modify some of the content and make it goofy, send us some screenshots, and just play around with the markup in Chrome Inspector so that you can get a feel for what it is to address and sort of edit and modify semantic markup that is produced out there on the web. And I say that with one caveat. As you go to more and more web pages and you sort of view this source, and I encourage you to read a lot of markup as you work through the episodes in this Intro to Front-End course, you're going to not see the prettiest of markup. You're not going to see things that are going to look fantastic, and they're not always going to be formatted all the best ways. And it's just important to know that there are developers that adhere to web standards, and there are developers that don't adhere to web standards. But essentially, there's this organization called the W3C that puts out a list of sort of standards, or a list of kind of conventions that you have to follow as a web developer. And reading these is like reading stereo instructions. I wouldn't recommend actually reading the standards. But getting familiar with what it means to write code in a standards-based way is really going to serve you well as you become and progress as a professional web developer. And we're going to talk a little bit more about validation and the process of validation in next episode. But for now, just know that as you browse the web, you're not going to always see the prettiest or most standards compliant markup. Cool. All right, so we talked about CodePen, we talked about viewing source on the web. One thing I want to show you before we conclude today's session is I want to show you that professional web developers don't do the work in CodePen. They don't do the work in things like Chrome Inspector. What they use is a web editor or a code editor. And for the purposes of our course here, we're going to be working with the freely available Atom code editor. And you can download it at atom.io. And Atom is wonderful because it works on Windows, it works on Mac, it works on Linux. It's this wonderful editor that you can use locally on your machine to create web pages and web page experiences. So if you haven't downloaded that, go ahead and pause your video right now and go and download that. And we're going to basically work through producing our first web page on our local machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the code that we've produced in CodePen, and we're going to copy and paste it into Atom, our local file system code editor. So we can do so by selecting all the text here in this HTML box on CodePen, and we can go to edit and copy. But as a developer, one thing I recommend that you get familiar and comfortable with is using hotkeys. So what we want to do here is we want to use the Command-C hotkey to quickly copy this HTML markup. And we're going to take it and we're going to copy it into a new document here in Atom. So if you open up Atom I already have my Atom editor open, but if you're looking for a pointer on how to open Atom after you've downloaded and installed it, you can just go to Spotlight if you're on a Mac and type the word Atom, and it's going to go ahead and open the editor for you. If you're on Windows, you can access it through the Start menu and launch Atom that way. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to go to File, New File, and I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the text that I took from CodePen. And again, I could go to the Edit pull down and hit Paste, but as a developer, I'm going to use the hotkey because I want to be quick. The most important thing, the most important commodity for me as a developer is my time. So I'm always thinking about how I can do my craft quicker. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Command-V hotkey. If you're on Windows, it's Control-V, similar for Linux. And notice here that the editor gives me a signal that I have pending changes to save through this little circular dot that's next to the document that I just opened. So what I need to do is I actually need to save this document just like I would an Excel spreadsheet or a Microsoft Word document. I need to actually save this file to my file system. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Save. And I've already arranged for this to exist in a nice and friendly place for me. I recommend that you do the same in your file system and have a central workspace, either on your desktop or in your documents, for you to do all the coursework that we're going to do together. And I'm going to name this file Hello, but I'm also going to be careful to use what's known as the right extension or the appropriate extension. And the extension of a file is indicated by everything that's to the right of the dot. And here we're basically giving a hint to the operating system, a hint to all of the applications that use the file system, that this document is a document that contains hypertext markup language. So we're going to use the appropriate extension here of HTML. And when I hit save, watch what the editor is going to do for me. It's going to use what's known as syntax highlighting to give me some hints and some perspective on the structure of my HTML web page. And this is just a wonderful kind of side effect of using a professional tool like Atom. It's going to give us some coloring and some hints as to the structure of our HTML document. Now, much of the professional workflow that a web developer uses is basically working in between their Atom code editor or whatever code editor that they choose. And one thing that you should know is there are many different editors out there, and everyone has very specific perspective and almost religious perspective on what editor they prefer. For our purposes, we're going to be sticking with Atom, but be sure to check out editors like Sublime and Vim as you get more comfortable and seasoned as a web developer. But for the purposes of our course, we're going to stick to Atom, and we're going to work exclusively in Atom. And we're going to be switching from Atom and the Chrome web browser as we do our web development. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to split my window between Chrome and Atom here. And in case you're wondering, this tool that I'm using on the Mac is called Divi. It's a wonderful tool. You can also use a tool called Size Up to kind of rearrange your windows as well. But I like to have sort of my code and my browser window side by side so that I can quickly switch from one to the other. So we need to open our local file that we just saved in our web browser. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on it, and we're going to say Show in Finder, or I think if you're on Windows, it's going to actually say Show in Explorer. So we're going to open that up in the file system, and then if we double click it, it's going to open up in Chrome. Also, we can also click and drag it into the Chrome instance here, and it should open for us as well. So this is sort of the professional workflow of working locally to edit and modify our HTML markup. So I can make some changes in my editor. For example, I can remove this paragraph tag, save it using Command S or going to File, Save, and then going back to my browser and refreshing the page. Now notice the change didn't happen until I actually refreshed the page. And you can refresh the page in Google Chrome using Command R or Control R, or hitting this little circular button here. And you can refresh the page that way. So if I go back to my Atom editor and I reintroduce the paragraph tag, notice that I've saved the document in my editor, but when I go back to my browser, that change is not affected. In order for that change to be affected, I actually have to refresh my page. So this professional workflow of making a change in our HTML editor, in this case Atom, and then viewing that change in our browser locally, kind of gives us that professional back and forth between the structural code-based editing and the visual display of our web page. So what I want you to do in between this episode and next is make sure you download all the tools that we've introduced to you throughout the duration of this episode. You want to make sure you download Atom, you want to make sure you download Chrome, and I want you to work on saving your first HTML document locally and viewing it locally on your Chrome web browser. Also, be sure to go out to some of your favorite websites and use the Chrome inspector to modify some of the HTML that exists in some of those pages. And for fun, and keep it professional, keep it safe for work, but for fun, send us some funny screenshots of the popular web pages that you go ahead and modify. It's a lot of fun and it's very empowering to actually go ahead and modify some of that hypertext markup language that exists out there on the web. Cool. And then lastly, go ahead and create your very first local web page using the process that I just showed you. And go ahead and add some information and modify the markup to include some information about you. So add some more p tags, tell us a little bit about yourself, and go ahead and share that in the Show Your Work channel on Slack chat. And I'd be happy to review and critique some of that markup, and we're going to continue to use that markup as we progress through the course. So we've shown you some professional tools that you can use to do your web development work. We've talked about the hypertext markup language and what that's all about. and how it represents the structure of our web page. And in later episodes, we'll show you CSS, which will allow you to focus on the aesthetics of that web page. We modified some popular web pages with the Chrome Inspector. And lastly, I showed you the professional web development workflow of working locally on your machine with Atom, the code editor, and the Chrome web browser. And we really want you to go ahead and start to adopt that workflow of saving things locally and viewing them on your Chrome web browser. So that's all I have for you today. I hope to see you in next episode. Thank you so much for joining me. And like I said, keep showing up, keep coding, keep grinding through this. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be very, very rewarding. I hope to see you in the next episode, and I hope to see you in Slack chat. We'll see you next time. Thanks.